You ever stop and think about the stories we're obsessed with, the shows we binge, the books we can't put down? They're not really about gods or kings anymore, are they? They're about people who feel, well, a lot like us. Today, we're going to unpack a quiet but massive revolution in storytelling, a shift that completely changed who gets to be the hero. And trust me, it matters way more than you think. So yeah, why are we so hooked on stories about regular people? It's a simple question, right? But the answer actually stretches back thousands of years. There is a straight line, a kind of hidden history that connects the ancient world's epics to whatever show you're currently watching. So how on earth did we get from these larger-than-life heroes to the relatable problems of today's characters?
I mean, just look at the contrast. On one side, you've got the Titans. Gilgamesh, Odysseus, Achilles. These guys were demigods, kings. Their whole lives were wrapped up in fate and the gods. And then, on the other side, you've got the people who define modern stories. A bored housewife like Emma Bovary. A woman trying to find her own identity like Nora Helmer. Or, Gregor Samsa, a guy who literally wakes up as a giant bug. The difference is just staggering. To get how we made that leap, we have to go way back.
All right, so let's set the scene. For most of history, serious storytelling was a pretty exclusive club. You basically had to be royalty or divine to even get an invitation. Back in the classical world, if you weren't a king, a legendary warrior, or at least arguing with a god, your story just didn't matter. It wasn't getting told. Epics like the Odyssey or Gilgamesh were all about these huge destinies and divine meddling. The entire focus was on the relationship between the gods and, as the Greeks called them, men of significant stature. Everyone else, they were just scenery.
So where were the everyday folks in all this? Well, if they showed up at all, they were basically background noise. A lot of the time, they were just there for comic relief, a cheap laugh. Their actual lives, their daily struggles, what they hoped for, what they were afraid of, none of that was considered important enough for a serious story. Their lives were, for all intents and purposes, invisible. And then something happened. A new kind of text came along that just shattered all the old rules. It planted a seed for a storytelling revolution that honestly would take centuries to fully grow. A literary critic named Eric Auerbach, in his incredible book Mimesis, he really put his finger on this moment. He makes this huge claim. He says that there had never, not once, been a serious treatment of common people in literature before the New Testament. Think about that. This wasn't just a new story, it was a totally new way of deciding who is even worthy of a story in the first place. All of a sudden, the whole focus flips. The stories aren't about the powerful and the beautiful anymore. They're about God's concern for the lowly and the outcast. And look who suddenly takes center stage. Fishermen, prostitutes, tax collectors, the very people that classical literature completely ignored. Now, their lives are the subject of incredibly serious, high-stakes drama. A perfect example of this is the story of Peter denying Jesus. Now, this isn't some king on a battlefield making a grand choice. This is just a fisherman standing in a courtyard, completely overcome by his own fear. In the literary world of that time, a scene like this it didn't compute. It broke every single rule in the book. And here's why it was so wild. See, according to the old rules, a story about a fisherman should have been a comedy, right? But Peter's crisis is, well, it's gut-wrenching, not funny. And it couldn't be a tragedy, because those were supposed to be about mythical figures from the distant past, not some guy in a current event. And it wasn't history either. History was for kings and big battles. This story didn't fit in any box. It created a new one by mixing this profound, tragic weight with the life of a totally ordinary person. Now, that little seed that was planted almost 2,000 years ago, it took a long time to really grow, but by the 19th century, wow, it had blossomed into a full-blown literary movement. One that would basically define storytelling as we know it today. And that movement was called realism. So writers who were part of this movement, they turned away from all the dramatic, idealized worlds you saw in Romanticism. They wanted to be more like scientists, to just objectively look at the world around them and report what they saw. And what was their favorite subject to study? The ordinary middle class. And the absolute high point of all this, the moment it all came together, was in 1856 with Gustave Flaubert's masterpiece, Madame Bovary. It's the story of a doctor's wife in a small town just trapped in a boring life and dreaming of something more. Her story has zero epic battles, no gods pulling the strings. But Flaubert treats her inner world with the exact same gravity that Homer gave to Achilles. I mean, think about this for a second.
There's a whole passage where Flaubert just describes in painstaking detail how bored Emma Bovary is while she watches her husband eat his dinner. It's the most mundane moment imaginable, but he treats that feeling, that boredom, with intense psychological seriousness. This right here, this is the revolution come full circle. The inner drama of a regular person is now considered high art. Okay, so this is all a really cool bit of literary history, but why does it matter to you right now? Well, because this whole revolution didn't just stop in the 19th century. Not even close. It directly shaped pretty much every story you love today. You can literally trace the path. It starts with the classical epics, all about gods and kings. Then the New Testament comes along and introduces this radical spark, the idea that ordinary people's lives have profound meaning. The realist novel takes that spark and turns it into a full-fledged artistic movement. And the DNA of that movement, it's in basically every complex, character-driven TV show you watch today. What this all boils down to is pretty simple. Every single time you get sucked into the life of a character who isn't a superhero or a queen, whether it's a stressed-out chef, a lonely office worker, or just a family trying to make ends meet, you are seeing the direct result of this 2,000-year-long transformation. Our entire entertainment world is built on this belief that an ordinary life is worthy of an extraordinary story. This revolution basically democratized drama. The biggest questions about life, love, right and wrong, they were yanked out of the heavens and off the battlefields and moved into places we all know. The realists set their dramas in the Victorian drawing room. Today, we find that same level of drama in a suburban home, a high school hallway, or an office cubicle. And maybe that's why these stories are so important to us. Like William Faulkner said when he accepted his Nobel Prize, stories help us not only to endure, but to prevail. By seeing our own messy, complicated lives reflected back at us with seriousness and with depth, we find connection, we find understanding, and maybe we find a little bit of grace in all of it. This whole incredible history has brought us to a point where any story from anywhere is possible. The most powerful, most moving narratives can now come from the most quiet, most unexpected, and most ordinary places. Which leaves us with a pretty exciting question to chew on. In a world just filled with untold stories, what ordinary life, what quiet struggle deserves to be our next great epic?